everyone. I apologize for our late start. We are, as a Board of Education, meeting today in work session. As a work session, there is no formal action that takes place, so there'll be no voting today. We have two agenda topics, and we will begin with the first, which is to discuss our board norms and communication processes. So colleagues, you should have received a copy of both.
I do have extra if it's needed.
Mrs. Ram has both for you if you should be in need. So let's begin with our operating norms. And at the top of the operating norm sheet, it states that our operating norms should be reviewed and or revised by the full board at least at each reorganization following an election. Well, we haven't followed an election, but we do have a reorganization meeting today. So I think it's good practice to review these norms annually. And so we can begin the discussion. Colleagues, with regard to the board norms, we have 14 of them listed. Are there any comments or questions about them?
President Williams, I have something that I'd like to add, and I'm not quite sure how we would word it, but since a lot of our communication is by email, I think it's important that not only do we check our email every 24 hours, but we respond to that email so that we know that it's been read and received. I think that's very important since we do a lot of communicating by email. Could that be one of our norms?
So you're thinking in terms of acknowledging receipt of emails sent?
Yes.
I would offer one caution, and that is that we don't violate the Open Meetings Act.
No, I don't mean it that
You said
way.
read and respond. That's why I'm saying we have to be very
Well,
careful.
there's certain ones that we don't respond to, and that's acknowledged in the email. But there are other ones, say about meetings or just things, or read letters that from the public, or just meeting, say, CNI meeting notes, minutes, just things that people don't know whether they're received or not. That's all.
Is there something more you would like to add? Because what I hear you saying, so I just want to make sure I understand, because number 5 is adhere to board communication processes, and then we do have that after that. So I do feel like that your concern is addressed, just not directly on this sheet of paper, but it is addressed on this. So I don't know if there's something more that you wanted. I feel like it is addressed in that communication processes.
If I may offer a suggestion of what I'm hearing, and thank you, Dr. Zentmeyer, you know I'm always very cautious about not violating Open Meetings Act, so I appreciate that. I think what I also hear Mrs. Murray say is we're talking about just acknowledging receipt of, and in a response that it merely received, acknowledged, a simple word, is not engaging in a dialogue that would violate the Open Meetings Act, because you're not having a discussion that should happen in a board meeting. So what that looks like, continue to discuss. I just want to throw that out there as you're having your discussion. If it's merely acknowledging you received something is different than responding to, as Dr. Zentmeyer points out.
So something as simple as received and read as a response to something that would come to us individually or collectively?
Correct. That would not violate it because you're acknowledging you've received information, which you can receive. You just cannot engage in dialogue or conversation that should be happening in a business meeting.
So Mrs. Mary, are you thinking a norm that would say something like acknowledge receipt of communication from superintendent and colleagues? Or what would,
Something like that.
Is that really needed?
I think it is.
I don't think it is.
Yes.
colleagues, anyone else?
It's kind of micromanagement. We all read our emails every day, and to say read and received, it just seems redundant when we have communication processes listed on the next 4 pages.
Is it something that could be included in, excuse me, not as a norm, but in the processes?
Yes.
Okay, well, when we get to communication processes, we'll see if we have a place that we can fit it in. Is that agreeable to all?
I'll
Yes.
make a note.
I'm actually in favor of the list of 14 items as is. I don't think there needs to be any changes.
I'm with Peter on that. I think the 14 are fine.
I agree.
I agree.
I do too.
And I have just a couple things. I do.
Sorry, we do
First-
this in policy. Normally-
first-
She normally has changes in policy.
First of all, it's gratifying to know that we are all in agreement that the 14 are norms that we embrace. I would just like to thank you, colleagues, for your adherence to number 3, the third norm, which is be punctual for board meetings and notify board leadership of absence or delay. It's incredibly helpful to board leadership to know in advance of a board member's absence, whether it be a planned or scheduled absence or one that comes up spur of the moment. I know many of you have been en route and have been concerned about a delay, and you very kindly texted to let us know that you would be arriving, and it cuts down on worry. We're assured that we're going to have a quorum, so thank you for the past and present communication, whether by word of mouth, text, or email, alerting leadership of an absent or lateness to a meeting. It's appreciated. Your thoughtfulness in respecting this norm is very appreciated. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is number 13, and I'm wondering, can we see that up there? I'm wondering if that is clear to all. I know what it says to me, but I'm unsure of its meaning to you. And does this need to be reworded for clarity? It seemed a little awkward when I read it, but I hadn't given any thought to that. I was more
really?
curious. Yes, I was more curious as to what it says to us as individuals.
I think a
What
part of-
does that mean?
I think a part of the lack of clarity, I don't think that anything said is necessarily unclear. I just think there's some, I don't know, I guess the middle section kind of gets a little lengthy, which may make it a little difficult to read. Knowledge of public, individual, and collective education, because to me, when I first read that, I thought that went to say public, comma, individual, comma, and collective, and I just think that maybe working around that would make things a little better.
Mrs. Rand, you have thoughts?
Well, no, honestly, in preparation for this, I know there was comment about, is there a way to clean it up? And I said, sure, I'll come up with some suggested language. Honestly, I wasn't exactly, I had thoughts on what it meant, but without knowing what it means to the board, I was unable to come up with a way to clean it up without adding additional words that would potentially change the meaning of it. So I didn't want to start unintentionally changing the intention of the board.
President Williams, are you talking about, and I don't know if this is the right term, professional development of some sort? Maybe that's not the right term, but
That's what it says to me, that board members are engaged in expanding their knowledge and their skill set by participating in offerings that would do that very thing, whether it be something that's offered through MABE or through some other leadership organization. That's what it means to me. I don't know what it means to anyone else.
Means to me, do your homework before you come to the board meeting so that you have,
So that's what it means to you. At a minimum,
Yeah.
you come prepared.
That's what I was going to say too. To me, it says do your homework.
Well, then I have a very simple solution to that. Then I think striking the word public, and I think expand our knowledge, comma, both as an individual member and collective body, comma, to enhance discussion and decision-making as a member of the board.
Sounds good to me.
Are we in agreement to that change? We have consensus?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Ram. I knew you could do it. We
Thank you.
appreciate that.
You have just lost your title as the wordsmith. We have a new one.
Well, thank you. And
They
the-
called you Thomas Jefferson.
I have one final that I would like us to look at and consider, and that is number 14. Contact school principals to arrange for visitations. I think that's important, and it's something that has been done, that certainly has been adhered to. And I think it's important that we give some consideration to adding to this, that we notify prior to the visit, not only the superintendent, but our fellow colleagues of the date and time of that planned visit. And I think that could be helpful in that if another board member is considering a visit, perhaps to that same school, for the same reason, it would make it possible to coordinate the visits. And I think it's just a very considerate and respectful thing to do. So that's my thought about 14. Any concern about adding that verbiage?
Can we put in there when possible? Because there are times where, like, I would run into staff or whatever, teacher, whoever it may be, who would offer me to come out the night before or whatever, right? And at that point, like, you know, it might not, it might be more of a spontaneous where, you know, I have done that before where, you know, I would reach out to the principal, but I wouldn't think at that point to reach out to everyone and, you know, just put everyone on there. So
Would you be notifying the superintendent?
I mean, I'm trying to, it's honestly, I need to go visit more schools because I haven't been to one in a while, but
Right.
I'm trying to think what I did last time I did. I think it was, the last time I went to a school, there was plenty of time when I went to see the CKLA program with Dr. Savine and a couple of county commissioners too, but I just worry that sometimes things can happen spontaneously, and that I think you should definitely let the principal know, like, you know, because they obviously drop what they're doing, but, you know, sometimes things happen spontaneous, and I don't want to have that expectation in there. So I would just like to add when possible.
Well, but if you're contacting the principal by email, all you have to do is CC the rest
Right,
of
but I
us.
mean, again, if it's spontaneous, you're not really thinking that far in advance, you know, like, I just don't want to lock us into something that, you know, you make a mistake or whatever, you know, that's what my concern is.
I would think, as a matter of propriety, if someone invited you tonight to visit tomorrow, I would say, tell you what, I'll come over as soon as I can. Let me contact your principal to see what time, day fits him or her, and not just show up the next day, because if you run into somebody out in a restaurant in the evening, and they say, come over to my classroom tomorrow, when do you call the principal? The next morning and let them know?
Right. Like I said,
I don't think that's fair to the principal. I would not be for that.
I just don't want to be locked into something that, for whatever reason, not that you're trying to get someone in a gotcha moment, because I definitely would never do that, but, and I just feel like that locks us into something unnecessarily. I agree with the reasoning for wanting to do that. I think the reason why I agree with the principals, because we know that they drop every single thing that they're doing to come with us, right? So they should have that heads up, but, we're still gonna go visit. I think at the very least, we should let our colleagues and superintendent know whether, not let them find out, in a surprise, but like, hey, just wanted to let you guys know I'm on my way over there or whatever. Like, I don't know, it wouldn't make sense to me to lock us into something,
I think just the next day showing up, even though you emailed the principal, it may not fit his or her schedule to talk to you and so forth. I would think that you would at least give the principal the courtesy of saying what day would best fit your schedule, because there may be something going on that the principal's not in the school. He may be at CES for a meeting. I don't see anything wrong with what the president is saying.
Well, the current language does say to arrange for visitation, so it seems to suggest, at a minimum right now, that the visitation shouldn't happen until it's been coordinated with the principal.
Right. And I personally can't imagine arranging to visit a school and a member of the superintendent's staff without making him aware that I'm having that visit. And if that means that I copy him on the email asking for that permission.
I mean, if that's what the board wants, I just would like it to say when possible. That's just me. I understand what you guys are saying. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying too. I don't want to get anyone in a gotcha moment, but sometimes I just don't want to lock us into something unforeseen. I personally worry about unintended consequences for something that you just want to go stop by for something and all of a sudden we broke a norm or something like that. I don't know. I just feel like it unnecessarily restricts us. So, but if that's what the board
I don't know that
wants.
there are
then-
any intended consequences for these things. I think these are just norms. These are just things that we agree we are going to observe and adhere to as a body who's working together to be respectful, cooperative, and collaborative. So there's no gotcha there for me.
Didn't it used to be, I seem to remember when I was first on the board, we had that practice and did that get changed? Of the practice being alerting a superintendent if we were going to be visiting a school?
You had to ask permission almost under one
That what it was, okay.
superintendent when we
I
first
feel
came
like we
on.
simplified it
And I want to
down.
make it clear that was not Dr. Michael. There was another superintendent where you had to ask permission to visit.
Right.
Is that fair? You had to ask permission?
I think so. I think that's the way that I remember it. It was more having a permission granted, but what I would like at the very least is that we are making the superintendent aware of that visit. The gotcha for me would be sitting in a business meeting and having a board member say during his or her comments, while I was at such and such a school, and colleagues and the superintendent have no knowledge of that visit or what it was about or what transpired. That to me is something that I think goes along with our not wanting to have surprises. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So we could add language that just says, contact school principals to arrange for visitations, comma, with notification to the superintendent. That's not a requirement you must seek permission. It just says, at some point, you're notifying the superintendent that you're visiting the school. That's one thought.
So do we have consensus that we want to include notification of the superintendent?
I just wanted to say when possible, but if it's not a requirement, then I'm fine with that.
Well, it doesn't say prior to, it just says with notification. So I would interpret it, and if the board wants to see more clarifying language, we certainly can. I would interpret that, say that at some point notification needs to be provided. It doesn't say prior to or following or anything like that, it just says with notification.
Out of professional
Does that cover,
courtesy for me,
does
I
that cover
would
your
do it.
concern?
I would notify the superintendent.
Are we in agreement that that's the change we want to make then?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Anyone else have anything? Craig?
Back to number 13 for a moment.
Uh-huh.
So this is just more of a clarificational question. So based on the changes that we suggested today, it's changing to individual board member and then collective board knowledge of education, correct, Ms. Ram?
It says expand our knowledge, comma, both as an individual member and a collective
Okay.
body, comma, to enhance discussion and decision-making as a board member. So it says that essentially individual board members should seek professional development or be prepared or whatever, also as a collective body.
Okay, thank
Can
you.
we insert the word body there?
I have both as an individual member and a collective body, is what I have
That's
written.
what, I don't have that on my sheet.
Suggested.
That's what I'm adding, expand our knowledge, comma,
You're adding
both.
that.
Yep,
Okay, thank
expand our
you.
knowledge, comma,
Thank
both
you.
as an individual member and a collective body,
Thank you.
comma, to enhance discussion. And we would strike of public, individual, and collective education.
I just want to be careful because to me that changes, at least in my eyes, that changes the intention of the norm. Because to me right now, as it reads, it says to understand, like to me, my understanding is that it's to expand knowledge of an individual's experience in an educational setting or in Washington County or a collective body within Washington County so that we as a board can make decisions based on and have productive discussions. And I think that it changes the focus of the individual being a student or the individual being a teacher to the individual being a board member. And I just wanted to.
Well, these are operating norms for the board itself,
I
just the
understand-
board.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that it's shifting the focus of the, I guess, knowledge, like from knowing like an individual's experience in the county to, like, I guess, broadening our knowledge of governance, if that makes sense, or how to properly act.
If I may respond, what I heard President Williams say and other board members, they were talking about professional development. Some of that is the MABE courses. It's making yourself aware of your individual education, whether that be through visiting schools, through MABE, through other professional development means. And as Dr. Zentmeyer adequately pointed out, also making certain you're prepared and ready to attend. So that's reading everything ahead of time, but then also as a collective body. So there are times we do professional development or the word's escaping me at the moment, retreats as a board to come together collectively. That's what I was hearing board members say as to what 13 meant to them.
Okay.
That's what 14 means to me. I think the be prepared for participation in meetings is addressed in number 4. So that interpretation to me would be redundant. So to me, it's really about, as Mr. Stauffer called it, professional development. So if that's our collective understanding. Yes, no?
I'm fine with what she suggested for number 13.
Yeah.
All right.
To be sure that we weren't kind of changing, like shifting on it. Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the operating norms? If not, this will appear as an action item for adoption by the board formally at our January 16th business meeting. I'm sorry, December 18th, I'm sorry.
19th.
19th. Sorry.
18th,
December
I'll be stuck in
19th.
jury duty.
It's January 16th. I have that date in my mind because of the standing committees. That's why that date's in my mind. Okay, so let's move on to communication processes.
And if I could make a recommendation, since it was requested that they be on the screen for members of the public to view as we're discussing, that we try our best to go in order, so I can alert the nice gentleman over there as to what slide we need to be on, so that members of the public can follow along, please.
I personally am good with them as is.
Any other comments?
I have one, based on an update to our board policy in section B, number 6. I would just ask that at the end, we add comma upon request so that it's consistent with what we changed in our board policy.
Upon request?
Yes, please.
Is there any discussion, colleagues, about?
Talking about the written minutes.
Correct.
Yeah.
They're published online, and then we just, the policy we changed to say upon request, so someone didn't just show up unannounced asking. Not that we wouldn't make it available, but if, Ms. Chekovic's not here, or, there's something that comes up, we did update the board policy to reflect that, since most people do go online nowadays.
We're good with that suggestion? Okay. Does anyone else have anything? I'd like us to take a look at B2, under communications and board meetings.
Which number, Melissa?
B2. And, this is acknowledging that there is a thing as policy drift, that sometimes practice drifts away from policy for whatever reason. But we have had, as a practice, that we address questions to the superintendent in advance of meetings whenever possible, to avoid having our staff, who more than likely will have to answer those questions, less than completely prepared. So I would like to see us revise this particular item so that we acknowledge that the staff needs to be adequately prepared to share the most accurate and up-to-date information. And they can best do that if they know in advance that a particular question is going to be posed during a business meeting. We're provided a packet that has detailed information in it. That doesn't say that during the course of discussion or during the course of a presentation, a question would come up in someone's mind that they haven't asked in advance. I'm not saying that you don't ever ask a question that you haven't put out there in advance. But again, I think it's respectful and helpful to the superintendent and staff to know in advance questions that are going to be asked. And then I think what usually happens, or should happen, is that question is then asked during the course of the business meeting, rather than responded to in an email from.
And as Dr. Zentmeyer had said earlier about another thing, we don't start discussing as board members about this situation and so forth.
Right.
Would you change the language of it? I mean, or just emphasize that it should be done?
I'd like to hear someone else's thoughts about that.
What I heard you say was essentially what the spirit is of the rule, and that's why I don't necessarily think that we would need to change it, because we know why that process is there, and I just feel like at that point, if we did add that, I don't disagree with you, but I just feel like if we added it, then we're essentially just in what the spirit is, and then
Right.
at that point, do we need to go do that for all of them? I just think that that's what the purpose of it is there for, so.
If I may,
to me, that item reads well, and I like the fact that it says whenever possible. But also kind of thinking about it in terms of making sure the board receives accurate information. I think whenever possible, for example, typically board documents go out on a Friday, recognizing that board members have lives and a challenging schedule, and it may be that some work through the weekend to prepare, others it may be at another time. But certainly, for the superintendent working with staff, if sometime on Monday, preferably Monday mornings, the day before a meeting, if there was a question that a board member had in terms of reviewing the packet, sharing that question with the superintendent will allow me to work with staff to make sure we're prepared to respond in a comprehensive and accurate manner. I think that would be beneficial to a board member asking the question, as well as the full board and the public. And once again, just kind of emphasizing whenever possible, recognizing that there are some circumstances based on the dialogue. A comment may be made by a staff member, maybe by the superintendent, that prompts a question by a board member.
So you're saying it's okay as is? I agree.
I agree.
I just want to ask that we observe that, and be mindful of it, okay?
I've found myself not sending questions, mainly because we get more emails from you saying don't discuss things that should be in open session. So I wanted to get full
So let me
permission
clarify.
from the attorney.
Let me clarify. Asking a question is not the same as going back and forth, receiving information, and engaging in a dialogue. The mere asking of a question does not violate it, provided the answer to that question is addressed in a business meeting where other board members have an opportunity to discuss it. So please note that if you ask a question, you should assume you will not hear the answer until the board meeting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And President Williams, if I may, just expanding on Ms. Ram's comments and to question. I do think, upon receiving an email from a board member and looking at protocols, full board would see it along with the superintendent. It would prompt me to acknowledge receipt of that email and just reference that I will work with appropriate staff at the upcoming meeting to address that question. So that way all board members are aware, but I've not responded to the question which would warrant an official meeting.
I need to add to this that I have never sat in these meetings and not had your Cracker Jack team have an instant answer with backup. So I'm not sure what the problem is, because they are always on the ball and they always have the answer. And if the person doesn't, then somebody else is walking up to address the issue. We're just really blessed with people who know what they're doing.
Dr. Zitmeyer, I would agree. We have an extremely talented senior leadership team, and that team is pretty deep. But certainly, receiving questions in advance allows us to further tap into the talent of this team so that we make sure that when the question is presented publicly, there is precise accuracy and also detail there.
Absolutely.
Colleagues, anything else? Dr. Savine is a member of the governance team. Is there anything that you think we should be considering?
I just want to express my appreciation to board members to the fact that you're actively engaged and your thoughtfulness in this process. I think it speaks to why we're a strong team as a board and superintendent. This exercise on an annual basis, I think, is very healthy and it benefits our community.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, so do we have consensus then to move these ahead with the changes as Mrs. Ram has noted?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. right, thank you.
Thank you.
So next on our agenda, we have a presentation from Mr. Prue, Mr. Emler, and Mr. Criswell on the 2023-2024 student enrollment and the free and reduced meal eligibility rates. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mrs. Williams, members of the board, Dr. Savine. We are at that time of the year again where it's time to go through what has occurred with our enrollments during the fall of the year. As you know, we capture September 30 enrollment annually as a metric that is sent to MSDE, which is then in turn used by the Department of Budget and Management as the generation of data for the governor's budget for education, as well as an impetus for how we address the county commissioners in our request for funding through the county commissioners and what their obligations are under the state law, under maintenance of effort and/or through the blueprint plans. We also include in this file, we always talk about where we are with our free and reduced meal eligibility data, because that also has an impact on funding as well, not only just for how the meal program operates, but how we receive funding for compensatory education. And as a point of note, that's an October 31 capture date. So a lot of the different programs have different dates. We're going to talk to you today largely about overall enrollment. It's different subsets, whether it's EL or special ed, have different capture dates. We typically talk about the overall data and then also the farm data, September 30 and then October 1, so October 31. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Criswell, who's going to walk you through our enrollment.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So as we look at the enrollment this year, I'm waiting for, I think, the presentation to get pulled up. We were kind of surprised. So I came and presented to the board last May, and we talked about we were expecting to be up from last year's September enrollment this year. We had what we called pretty modest enrollment projections, and we were expecting to be up not quite as much as we actually came in. So we actually came in a little bit higher than our projections, which was good. So between this September and last September in the K-5 grades, we were up by about 175 students. Now, typically when I talk change in enrollment and grades, it's either what we call rollover, which is where we have a large or small exiting grade and a larger or smaller incoming grade, or we have migration, where we see as grades move on to the next grade level, they either increase or decrease. At our elementary level, our exiting 5th grade and our incoming kindergarten class were about the same size this year. So what we really saw was in-migration. We saw that to the tune of about 175 students. Really, the two biggest grades were last year's kindergarten grew 50 students for this year's 1st graders. And then last year's 2nd grade grew 50 students for this year's 3rd grade. That was part of that 175 student growth. So as we looked at the middle school level, we were actually expecting those numbers to be down a little bit, kind of flat to down, and we came in 25 students higher, or 24 students higher. So again, that was another situation where it was not rollover, it was in migration. We saw a few more students come in to the prior grades as they moved on. At the high school level, last year when we talked about projections, I had mentioned that we thought we would be increasing a little bit this year, and then in future years we would start to see that number come back down. This year, we actually stayed pretty flat. So we didn't go up as much as what we thought we were going to, which may have an impact on projections as I come back to you here this coming May and talk to you about how the new grade levels are going to proceed. So certainly some things we want to watch. All in all, K-12, we're 192 students above where we were last year, and that's a little bit higher than what we projected. We projected to be about 120, 130 higher, and we came in 170 higher. Not too bad, 192 higher, excuse me. I'm doing the math in my head as I'm talking. Pre-K to 12, we're 252 higher, and again, we're about 30 higher than what we projected from that last year. So if we look back 20 years, you can see that we did experience some growth. We started in the 90s, and we went to about 2006. We had a pretty steady growth. From 2006 to about 2019, our trend line was pretty flat, where about every year we would describe it as slow but steady growth. Then we hit the pandemic in 2019, 2020, and you could see where we dropped. And then all of a sudden, our growth is kind of that same trend line and coming back. And right now, we're about 450 students less than where we were in 2019. And as we go through, we were going to expect a little bit of a drop in 2020 anyway, based on some of our birth rates and some of our class sizes, but it certainly accentuated what we experienced. Looking at the breakdown of the 3 different types of schools, you can see the elementary at the top of the graph, and you can see that dip that occurred during the pandemic. The purple line at the very bottom is our 6th to 8th grade, and then the red line is the high school level. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those, but at the elementary school, last year we basically had 3 class sizes in the 1600s, 2 in the 1500s, and 1 that was in the 1400s. I talked about the in-migration. This year, we have 3 in the 1600s and 3 in the mid to high 1500s. So that's something we're going to watch as we go through and see how that may or may not impact us at the middle school level as we look at future projections. Looking at the school-to-school changes, a couple things I'll point out. We saw Bester decrease by about 38 students. This was due in part to a large exiting 5th grade, small incoming kindergarten that helped drive that enrollment down. We saw a little bit of out-migration in the 4th and 5th grades there. At Fountaindale, we saw an increase of 29 students. A lot of that was expected because we typically will see out-of-district students come into the magnet program there. But we saw some in-migration in 4th and 5th grade, about 10 students each, which kind of helped increase that number as well. So pretty close. Jonathan Hager increased by 24. Again, it was a small exiting 5th grade, large incoming kindergarten class, and we expected that number to continue to go up based on the build-out of Hager's Crossing and McCleary Hill. So all expected, just kind of giving you some reason and rationale as to why the numbers had changed. Morgansville this year was up by about 29 students. Now, Jeff and I have talked, I know that it's due to the small exiting 5th grade and large incoming kindergarten class, but we're anxious to geocode those students to try to get an idea of what's happening at Morgansville. It's one of the schools we want to pay close attention to over the next few years based on some of the prior development that's occurred in that area and some of the adjacent attendance zones. Pangbourne's up 21 students, and Williamsport is up 43 students. Williamsport was up through in-migration at all grade levels. So that's another, now, we expect that at the 2nd grade level because of the magnet program. But at the other levels, we want to take a look at that school as well to see where the kids come from. Do they move into existing homes? There's just not a lot of development in that area. So it's something we're going to take a good look at and figure out what impact it may have on the middle and high school as we move forward. Speaking of the middle schools, a few years ago, we went through the bubble at the middle school grade, and we saw that increase to almost 5,300 students. And in the past few years, we've been under right around that 4,800 mark. And stayed pretty flat. It basically was pretty simple at the middle school level. We were expecting to be up at Boonesboro Middle. We projected that based on the exiting 8th grade and the incoming 6th grade. Same thing at Northern Middle. We had the same deal where we were expecting it to come down, but basically reverse at Northern Middle. We were expecting the larger leaving 8th grade and the smaller incoming 6th grade. So when I talk about geocoding, that's where we can determine what grades are going to succeed into the next grade level. And it helps give us an idea for future staffing decisions and projections and whatnot. At the high school level, again, we kind of stayed flat between last year. We only increased by 7. And we think we might see that decrease that we projected last year happen sooner. Now, when we look at the school enrollment, the first thing you know is, everybody forgot to enroll at Boyd J. Michael Technical High School. As you know, that's not the case. This year, we changed our reporting with the state, and we are now reporting all those students back at their home school. So while it looks like it's a negative 548 at that facility, that's actually not the case. This is just how we presented it to the state and how it will be shown on all the state documents. To give an idea of what really happened, we're going to show you the traditional format. And as you can see, we're up 44 students at Boyd J. Michael Technical High School. That's directly attributed to the additional 20 students in sophomore year and the cosmetology program and the 2nd year of the diesel program opening up. Last year, we only had juniors. This year, we have juniors and seniors. The other high schools were pretty close and came in pretty much where we were anticipating them. And our net overall change was about 7 students. At our special enrollment centers, last year we had a few more students than we typically normally see in the Job Development Center. Every year we pretty much project that enrollment between Marshall Street and JDC to be about 83 to 85 to 81. Last year was kind of an anomaly. We expect the numbers to kind of come back and stay on track. So we'll keep an eye out in case there's any changes in the program or anything we need to consider.
Okay. So for the compensatory education funding numbers, as you can see, we are up 2.4% over last year. And really, there's not a whole lot to report. You know, you could sit and speculate about free and reduced numbers and the changes demographically that happen at schools. And I know, you know, as Cristobal mentioned Morgansville. One of the things that we're looking at in Morgansville is Seneca Ridge, if I said it correctly, the development that's close there, that we're seeing an influx, that we potentially, we're going to be looking at those numbers, and you know, we're speculating that they may be some of the lower income families that are moving into that area that are driving that number. And that can happen at a number of given schools. But, you know, 2.4%, we've reported those to the state. The state will then take those. There's a calculation that is done, and then that equates to the compensatory education funding that we'll receive.
Right. There's always a little adjustment on the free and reduced number, in part because we have 13 schools that are in the USDA's community eligibility program. So you have grandfathered free and reduced rates from the year you last took applications, and then there's adjustments that happen. So we'll wait to see. This is the number we reported at this point, but there may be some fluctuation. We actually think that number might tick up slightly before the budget funding is done. So we'll keep an eye on that moving forward, and staff is happy to answer any questions you have. You also, in your packet, you have 2 one-page sheets. One is the traditional, well, really both traditional formats that we receive that are the enrollment by school by grade, and the other is the free and reduced eligibility also by school, and we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions for the gentleman?
Has there been any, it always comes up as a topic about the, depending on free and reduced farm rates as a number. Has there been any continued conversation about that and eventually switching over to another sort of metric?
There is some discussion that was happening at MSDE and with the state board on a metric actually that State Superintendent Chaudhary had brought from San Antonio that used community neighborhood markers based on census data. There doesn't seem to be movement at the current time. It's not been a topic recently, I don't believe, with the state board, but that is something we are watching because the blueprint does call for an alternate metric to be used for compensatory education. We actually believe from some of the early data we've seen that that metric may be a positive change for funding for WCPS.
I remember there being an alternative metric
Yep.
bandied about, and that makes sense.
Yes, Mrs. Murray?
You mentioned Seneca Ridge. Where is that located?
So if you're driving along the interstate, it's just behind the Comfort Inn. I think it's the Comfort Inn. There's the Burger King. As you go past the Morgansville exit, there's a Burger King. I think it's a Comfort Inn. I know there's a.
That's- yep.
And then
I
there's,
know the general
yep,
area.
Yep, right
Thank
on the left there, right behind it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Almost directly. The entrance is, I think, fairly close to the entrance to the school, kind of across adjacent,
Right across
to the
from
east a little bit.
Marcus.
Yep.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I need to go to Morgansville.
One other question too.
Sure.
This, I know you also present later after doing a study, right? But has there been any sign that birth rates increased during COVID?
So we'll talk about birth rates when we do the enrollment projections. And that was one of the things I talked about back when COVID hit. I said, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen, you know. We weren't sure if we were going to see birth rates increase because we were all staying at home. You know, a few years ago, I made the joke that if the Ravens won the Super Bowl, we might see birth rates go up or something. You know, we didn't know. But what they called it the big birth bust. And that was nationwide. And I've talked to our demographer about this as well. It's not just here, it's everywhere where we've seen birth rates come down. And I've been having a lot of discussions with birth rates lately. I've been reading a lot of articles about it, actually, because our birth rates are staying about where they were, but they're not coming up yet. So it's something we're going to monitor. But what we have been seeing is where we're not seeing those births and those students coming in, we're seeing in-migration. So we're seeing more people come in. So it's offsetting that some, but it changes how we try to determine it makes it harder to come up with the projections, So it's one of those things we'll watch, and I'll try to come back with some better information this April, May, when we update the enrollment projections.
My question is, you said earlier you're going to look and see what caused all that extra migration, specifically at Williamsport, that you weren't really expecting. Once you do gather that information, what will you do with that?
Okay, so I've already talked.
You got really excited.
No, it's good. Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually good. Well, you're going to read it. What are you going to do with it? So I've already had some discussions with our demographer. And as you know, through the facility committee, we come in with development information.
Mm-hmm.
So if we know a new development, say it's going to have 1,000 homes, and it's a single-family homes, we know that they're going to be about 0.43 students per home. So all of a sudden, we can figure out the phasing, and we can say, okay, we're going to have 430 extra students over this amount of time coming into these schools. When we don't have that development, then we can go through and I can look at it on the map and say, okay, they're all kind of spaced out, no big deal. Or, oh, we have 50 more kids coming from this area, and it turns out it's an existing apartment complex. So it's not a new development. It's something that I can go and say, hey, did you guys lower your rents? Did you do anything that caused this increase of students than what we had the year before? A lot of times I'll get that information from the principal, but I'm a visual person. I like to be able to see it on the map, and then when Deanna and I come up with the projections for the coming year, it's helpful when I can show that metric to say, okay, here was last year, here's this year, here's what happened, here's what I found out, how do we want to look at this moving forward? And it's not exact, but it's a better guess than just running all the numbers through.
And as we look at that GIS metric as well, we're tagging some demographics with those students as we're looking at it. So we can see with that immigration or the individual changes at schools, are they free and reduced? Are they English learners? How are they tagged in the system for services, which then helps us decide in terms of from a budget and planning process where those services needed moving forward, as opposed to, ooh, we grew by 20 here, so we should add staffing there. We can try to project some of that staffing to that new location, especially if you're seeing a series of continued growths at particular schools.
Thank you. It's funny, the biggest complaint I hear about enrollment projections is from our own staff when I miss it, and we get staffing mixed up. So it's kind of funny when we go through that.
Maybe not a very intelligent question, but since we don't report the technical high school as a separate school anymore, would there be a need in the future to change that to, say, technical center and take away the designation of high school? Just curious, that's all.
In order to do a name change, I know you have to go through a process and a vote with the state. I'm not 100% positive that the change in the reporting, I think the state's still figuring out some things, so.
Yeah, I don't know that Mr. Stauffer, that it necessarily requires a name change on the facility itself. I mean, for our purposes, it's still the technical high school, and
yeah.
I don't think it, we've had some back and forth discussion. There's not been a clear sort of indication from the state that, they really don't get into the naming. That we can change the name, they change the name, it happens. Is when we changed the name from Washington County Technical High School to Boyd J. Michael was really just a letter. Here's the board's action in the minutes, and please reflect the change in your catalogs.
But at that time, it was still a separate high school.
Right, but I don't think necessarily, even though we're considering the school a program,
Right.
as opposed to a, let's say, a credentialed graduating high school, students always had the opportunity of also graduating from, and going through services, of course, at their home high school. So I don't think the state really cares one way or the other.
Just curious.
Any other questions? Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So colleagues, that concludes our agenda items for this afternoon's work session. So if there's nothing further, we can adjourn.